What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Kevin Sucks at Poker vlog number 7. For this one, we're back playing more 2-5 no limit at Bellagio, right in the heart of the World Series. Good games going on. Starts out a little slow, but I start to pick up some pretty interesting hands as the night goes on. I'm here with my buddy Luna. She says if you don't want to make her sad, you should like and subscribe. Helps build the channel, and you already made her sad by not subscribing. So let's get those subscriptions up, please. And thanks for watching. We'll catch you after the hands. I sit down at a 2-5 game with the max 500 at about 8:35 p.m. There's a huge list for my game, but between a couple people walking and a seat or two that hasn't been filled yet, we're playing 5-handed. I'm up about 100, and 10 minutes in, I get dealt the red aces under the gun. I raise to 20. The +1 player calls. The cutoff player calls. And the small blind player calls with only the big blind folding. So we're 4 ways to a flop. The flop is 10 of spades, queen of spades, 3 of hearts. This flop seems okay for aces. It's not great. My aces are red, so I don't have a backup spade. With 3 people calling me to this flop, there could be queen 10s, there could be sets of 3s, maybe sets of 10s, probably not sets of queens. That'd probably 3-bet me pre-flop. The small blind, who's a regular, I believe local, who I've played with a few times and seems pretty solid, leads for 20. I intend to raise to 60, but I only have 50 chips in my hand, so I raise to 50. The cutoff calls 50, and then the small blind goes all in for about 340 more. So I have an interesting spot here early with aces. Usually if someone leads at you after you raise, that's a 1 pair kind of hand or something sort of weak, but not necessarily when you raise and then they 3-bet. It could be that he has some sort of combo draw or even just a queen that's trying to push someone off a hand here by 3-bet shoving. But I'm in a tough spot because I have the player behind me who cold called 50, and they also could be playing something like queen 10 and trying to just smooth call my raise to induce more action. Let me know what you would do in this spot. But I think for a while, and I think one thing that a lot of people do is overplay aces. I've put $70 into the pot, and it's $340 more to make this call. I just don't feel like my aces are good, so I think that I probably can find a better spot to get my money in here, and I decide just to fold the aces, especially with the player behind me. The player behind also folds, so I have no idea what the guy who 3-bet shoves on me has here. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think this is too weak of a fold, or do you think it's a good fold in this spot? And that's the first pair of pocket aces that I have on this session, with several more to come. About 10 minutes later, we're still playing a little short-handed. I'm on the button with Ace-7 of clubs. The under the gun player limps, the +1 player limps, the cutoff limps, and I decide to go ahead and raise this one up to 20. The small blind calls. The big blind calls, the under the gun player calls, the hijack calls, and the cutoff calls. I suppose if I wanted to thin the field, I should have raised more than 20, but we go 6-handed to a flop. The flop is 7 of spades, 7 of diamonds, 4 of clubs. So that's a pretty great flop if you're going to raise with Ace-7 of clubs. It gets checked to me, and sometimes I would disguise the strength of this hand, but I'm on the button, so I feel like this should be a bet here. First, nobody's going to put me on a 7 after I raise. I feel like some people are going to want to try to raise me, thinking that this flop is not good for me, even though it really is. And it's also possible that someone with pocket 8s or pocket 9s is going to want to go crazy and start raising this pot up. So I bet 20, the +1 player calls, and the hijack player calls. The turn is the 6 of clubs, which is good in that now I have a backdoor nut flush draw. But it's also not good because it connects to the board pretty well for straights or possibly something like 7-6, although obviously that's not very likely. If someone has a full house here, then I'm probably just going to lose a fair amount of money, especially on this turn. I can pretty much never get away from 3 7s with the best kicker and also a backdoor flush draw. It gets checked to me again. I bet 65. The under the gun player calls again, and the hijack folds. Not really sure what the under the gun player is calling with. There's no great draws on the flop other than maybe 5-6, so it's possible they turn a pair and they're open-ended, but I feel like I have the best hand. The river is the queen of spades. He checks to me again. I bet 120. but he ends up folding and I win this one. So here's a hand that I don't play super great, but I do like to share not only my well-played hands, but also my badly played hands. I try to keep it pretty real with you guys, not only on sessions, but also on individual hands during sessions, even if they can be kind of embarrassing. So on this one, I have ace queen of clubs in the under the gun position. I raise to 20. It gets to the button, who raises to 40. This is that same player who 3-bet shoved me against my aces earlier. I call the min raise. The flop is 10 of hearts, jack of hearts, 7 of hearts. That is not the right suit or color. I do have a gut shot to Broadway, and I do have 2 overs, so it's not the worst flop, and the odds of him flopping a flush aren't great. So I check to him. He bets 60, and I notice after he bets 60 that he looks back at his cards, which usually, but not always, means that someone potentially has a pair, and they're looking back to see if either of their cards are a heart. So to me, I think he's looking back for a heart, and I don't think he probably has one. So once he bets 60, I decide I'm going to call, and if a heart hits, I'm going to either check raise him or put a big bet in and make things tough on him if he doesn't have a heart. The turn is the jack of spades. That pairs the board. I check again, and this time he checks. The river is the 8 of spades, so my plan of betting a heart don't come to fruition. But now there's a 4-liner on the board to a 9 making a straight. And also any jack would beat any single pair, which I don't think he has. I think he would bet a jack on the turn for sure, unless he had something crazy like quad jacks or 10 jack for a full house. Maybe he checks that to disguise his strength and try to let me get a heart to win more money. But once he checks the turn, I figure he's probably not super strong. So it's on me, and I either have to check and basically give up with ace high, or I can take a bet at it. And I think the board's pretty scary. I think it's pretty hard to call with a lot of hands, and he's shown a lot of weakness. As I'm thinking about betting, it looks like he's gathering chips, which a lot of people do when they don't want you to bet. Usually they're not going to bet them. They're trying to make it look like they're going to bet them, and they want you to just check because they're trying to show you, oh, I'm going to bet, so you don't want to bet and get raised. Then he asked me, oh, did you check? And I say, no, I didn't check yet. I didn't do anything. So based on all that, he feels pretty weak to me based on everything I've explained in this hand. So I bet 75, which isn't a big bet into this pot, which has over 200 in it. But I feel like if he was on a heart draw, which I didn't think he was, but if he was on a heart draw and miss, he probably can't call. If he just continuation bet this flop and miss, like with an ace king or an ace queen, he probably can't call here unless he just makes a hero call and makes a great read. But he ends up making the call. He has pocket kings with no heart, so I was right in my initial read that he didn't have a heart and he did not want to see a heart. Maybe if I bet more than 75, I get him to fold kings here, but I kind of don't think so. I think on the turn he's in check call mode, regardless of what comes, unless it's a heart. If a heart comes, I think I can get him to fold, but based on the run out, I think he's calling my river bet no matter what, unless I go absolutely crazy with the bet. So I think I have a decent reason for my bet of 75, but I end up just kind of playing this hand not great, and once the heart didn't hit, I probably should have just given up, but I didn't want to do that and not have a chance of winning. Pretty shortly after this hand, I switched games. The game's just not that great. There's about 3 locals in my game other than me, and while the game's probably beatable, I'm not trying to play a not great game during the World Series. There's 8 or 9 tables going. There just has to be a better game to play in. Other than there being some short stacks, this looks like a better game. I get dealt ace of clubs, 10 of diamonds in the low jack. I raise to 20. The button calls, the big blind calls, and the big blind is very short stacked. He has about $77 or so pre-flop. The flop is queen, queen, 10, rainbow. The big blind shoves all in for his last $57. I call with ace 10. The turn's a 6 of spades. The river's a 10 of clubs, giving me the bottom full house. And he shows ace 10 of spades for the same hand, essentially, and we chop this one. In this next one, I have 10 jack offsuit and the low jack. The +1 player raises to 15. I call, and the cutoff calls. The flop is jack, queen, queen, rainbow. That's an interesting flop on these kind of hands because it's hard to know where you're at. It's 3-way, so someone could very easily be playing a queen. But it gets checked to me, and I decide to bet $20, a feeler bet at it. I kind of want to see where I'm at. The cutoff calls and the +1 player also calls. So now I figure I'm probably in a bit of trouble, and I get called in 2 spots that likely means someone has a queen, so I'm going to be very careful. The turn is a 5 of spades, still a rainbow board, and it gets checked around. I would tend to expect the cutoff to bet a queen in this situation since he's last action. I bet the flop, so once it gets checked to him on the turn, I would expect a queen to bet, with maybe the exception of something like pocket queens or jack queen, where the hand is just so strong he's hoping for people to catch up. But for the most part, I expect a queen to bet there, so I don't think the cutoff likely has a queen. The river is the 10 of hearts, giving me 3 pair, and no matter how many times I lobby for 3 pair to be a hand in Holdem, I've sent countless emails to the Poker Authority saying we should play 7-card Holdem, not 5. 3 pairs should be a thing. Nobody's responded to me. I don't know what else to do. I've called the numbers. I've sent the emails. I've sent faxes. Now the +1 player leads for 30, which usually means that they have a hand, and on the river they want to make a bet at it so it doesn't get checked behind, especially since the turn checked around. But I'm not sure about that. Even though I have a player behind me, I call 30 here. I think it's a fairly weak call. I probably should just be folding on this river, but I decide to call and see what happens. And then when it gets to the cutoff, he raises to 100. So I'm done with the hand as soon as I see that. The +1 player thinks for a long time. He ends up calling. I think maybe he had something like ace king and rivered Broadway, or maybe he had a queen the whole time. But the cutoff shows queen 10 for a rivered full house. I ended up losing an extra 30. I probably didn't need to lose here. Probably can't be good on the river, so that's probably just not a great call to begin with. Not sure why the cutoff didn't bet the turn with queen 10. As I said, I would have expected a queen to bet the turn once it got checked around to him. He's final action. I don't know why he's checking a queen behind there without a full house. I don't think that's a good play. But it ends up working out for him here when he boats up on the river and gets paid off. After that 10-jack hand, I'm down about 200, so I add 200 on and I'm in for a total of 700. Here I'm in the small blind with pocket 7s. The +1 player raises to 15, it folds around to me and I call, and the big blind also calls. The flop is 7 of spades, 4 of diamonds, king of clubs, which is a pretty great flop for pocket 7s. I check. The +1 player bets 15, and I end up just calling here, trying to disguise the strength of my set in a pot that's not that big. I want to let the +1 player keep betting at it, maybe build a pot for me. The big blind folds. The turn is the 4 of spades, bringing me in the full house. That's a great card. It gets checked around. Then the river's a 9 of hearts, being first action. I bet 70, hoping that he has something like a king that can call a bet, or thinks I'm bluffing here, but he ends up folding. Here's another hand I play badly. I'm in the big blind with ace-2 offsuit. The +1 player limps, and the button limps. I just go to a flop. The flop is 4 of clubs, 2 of clubs, 6 of spades, so I flop bottom pair and a backdoor spade draw. It gets checked to the button, who bets 10. I call, and the +1 player also calls. The turn is the 6 of diamonds, pairing the board, and it gets checked around. The river is the jack of diamonds. I check. The button bets 15, and for some reason, I feel like now's a good time to raise because it's a paired board and he's been weak the whole time. So I decide raising to 50 is a good decision here. It's not a good decision, really, for any reason, and let me explain why this is bad, just in case it's not super obvious to everybody why this is bad. 1, I have showdown value with bottom pair if he is bluffing. 2, the pot's super small, so there's no reason to try to take a bluff at a pot like this. And 3, raising from 15 to 50 is just not enough to push anyone off any kind of hand. So if he has anything, calling 35 is an easy call. If he doesn't have anything, I was going to win anyway with the 2. So anyways, he ends up calling. He has jack queen, river to pair of jacks, and he wins this pot. I don't lose a ton of money here, so it's not disaster, but it's just a bad way to play a hand. Don't do that. You don't want to do this. somewhere between that last hand and this next hand, I had pocket aces, got folded around to me and the small blind. I was in the big blind, and I always offer a chop to people as long as they are people who chop. I follow the rule that if you always chop, you always chop, and if you never chop, you never chop, and I'm totally fine with that. I don't get mad about either, but you just have to be consistent on it. Unless your game gets something like four-handed and you still want to play, in which case I'll always tell people, hey, I always chop, but if we get four-handed, I'm not going to chop. I put it out there before we get there. So my second hand of pocket aces on the session ends up getting chopped. Sometime thereafter, I'm in the small blind and I get ace of hearts, ace of spades. They are off-colored aces, but I decide that I'm going to play them this time. So this is my third set of pocket aces on this session. The under the gun player raises to 15. Everybody folds to me. I 3-bet to 55 out of the small blind, and only the under the gun player calls. The flop is 2 of diamonds, 4 of spades, 5 of spades, which isn't a terrible flop, but it's also not a great one. That's a lot of connected cards. There's 2 spades. I do have the ace of spades, which helps me. I have a gut shot wheel draw. So it's not the worst flop. The under the gun player has been playing pretty erratically at this table. He has been 3-bet shoving tournament style with things like pocket 3s and pocket 6s. It's worked out for him, but typically you don't want to play your cash games like tournaments. You don't have to shove pocket 3s in a 3-bet style. But anyways, that's this player. He has been not playing super well. Definitely someone I'd like to get involved with. After this flop, I bet 75 and he folds. Literally the very next hand, I'm on the button, and I once again get dealt ace of hearts, ace of spades. Not only pocket aces again, back to back, but the same exact aces I just had. I tricked the dealer into not giving them back. Don't tell anybody. The low jack limps. I raise to 25, and the big blind, who is the same player I just was against with pocket aces, he calls. Everyone else folds. The flop is queen of hearts, 5 of spades, 5 of hearts. This seems like a very good flop for me. I don't expect him to have a 5, but if anybody's going to show up in this situation with a 5, it very well could be this guy. Doesn't even have to be something like ace-5 suited. It could be any random 5-7 suited, really anything. So he could have a 5 here, but if that's the case, I'm probably not going to really be able to get away from my hand too easily. So he checks to me. I bet 25, and he check raises me to 80. I'm still not too afraid, though. If he has a 5, he's probably just going to get a lot of my money. I think about re-raising here, but I think that's too strong, and my hand's almost face up if I 3-bet him here on the flop. Is if he raises on this flop and I 3-bet, is saying one of a few things, I think, unless I'm just going crazy bluffing, which is possible, but not super likely, I don't think. So I'm saying I have aces, kings, possibly queens, although I would never play queens that strong if I flopped a full house. Potentially ace queen, maybe king queen. Those are really the only hands I could be 3-betting here unless I randomly raised pre-flop with ace-5 suited or something and I hit it. So I think about it, but I just call. The turn is a 4 of diamonds, which is a complete brick on this board. And now after check raising the flop, he checks to me, which is a little confusing to me. You'll see people check raise draws sometimes, but usually they're going to continue betting on a turn if they check raise a flop. Otherwise, it kind of loses its momentum. So that doesn't make a ton of sense. And if he had a huge hand here, like a 5 or something he thought was the best hand, he'd probably lead rather than just check. So it's a little confusing to me what he has, but I feel like my aces are probably good at this point. I'm feeling like he could be on some sort of heart draw. This guy has chased flushes down to the river several times in the session since I've moved to this table. So I feel like maybe he's check raising a flop with a heart draw. My other thought is maybe it could be something like queen king is the other hand I think is the most likely hand. When he checks to me, I feel like my aces are good. I definitely am not checking back. So I think for a little while, and I bet 155. And he makes the call. The river is one of the cards I don't really want to see. It's not as bad as a queen, but it is the 9 of hearts. So the heart flush comes in if that's what he was on. Now, he thinks for a little while, and he leads at me for 225. This is a very confusing line my opponent's taken in this hand. Check raising a flop, check calling a turn, and then leading at a river when the 9 of hearts hits. So while I thought my hand was good the whole time, now I'm in a bit of a tough spot. I'd like you to pause the video for a minute. Let me know what you think he has and also what you would do in my situation. It's a 225 bet. The pot's pretty big. My line of thinking at this point is this. I put him on one of two hands, basically. I put him on something like king, queen, or maybe ace, queen, although obviously that's less likely when I have aces. That line kind of makes sense. And when I call his check raise, he decides to slow down. The other thought I'm thinking is he may have had just a heart draw. I do have the ace of hearts, which makes it less likely that he's on a heart draw. But again, this guy could be playing anything. And he could potentially check raise a flop with a heart draw, hoping I fold. And then once I just call, he's trying to peel a turn. And then when the turn misses, he checks to me, I bet. And then he calls, hoping to hit a heart. And then when the heart hits the river, he leads at me. Those are the two most likely hands. I think about it for literally 50 seconds, just trying to go through it in my head. I'm trying not to let the past hands where he kept hitting rivers, kept hitting flushes, really make me feel like he for sure has a flush. And I feel like it really could just be king queen played in a kind of unorthodox way that wouldn't be the way I would play it, but I could see how maybe this guy would play it this way. You would think if you had king queen, you would maybe check a river when the heart gets there. So after I think for a long time, I do end up making the call. After I call, he shows king, queen, and the aces are good. I end up winning a really nice pot here. Here I'm in the +1 with ace, jack of diamonds. I raise to 20 and only the button calls. The flop is jack of clubs, 6 of hearts, 3 of hearts. I bet 25 and he calls. The turn is the 10 of hearts. I check, he bets 30, even though I don't love my hand at this point. It's too weak to fold to a $30 bet, so I make the call, thinking that I'll see what happens on the river. The river's the king of diamonds. I check, and now he bets about 100. I think he most likely made a flush on the turn. The flop's pretty dry other than heart draw, but either way, when the king of diamonds hits, I just feel like there's way too much that beats me. I don't really see how I can be good unless he's just bluffing with air, and it doesn't seem likely to me. I just don't feel like my hand's probably good, so I let this one go. A little while later, I'm in the +1 again with ace, king of hearts. The under the gun player limps. I raise to 25. The big blind calls, and the under the gun player also calls. The flop is king 3-8, all spades. It checks to me. I bet 50, and the under the gun player calls. The turn is not what I want to see. It's the 2 of spades. He checks, and I check behind. The river is the queen of hearts, and now the under the gun player leads for 100. This particular player has been very tight all night. I haven't seen him do any bluffs. He's been folding a lot when he misses or he doesn't have a hand. He has not been super involved. So here I give him credit for likely having a pretty big spade, and I decide just to fold this one. Here I'm in the hijack. I have pocket kings. The under the gun player raises to 15. I raise to 55, and he calls. The flop is 2, 5, 6 rainbow. That seems pretty great to me. He checks to me. I bet 55, and he folds. This hand's fairly interesting. As I told you, I chopped aces earlier when I was in a different seat at this table, and the guy to my left is a nice European gentleman. He does not chop. Like I said, that's totally fine with me. If you never want to chop, don't ever chop. If you always want to chop, always chop. At least in the same session. Just don't say you want to chop when your hand sucks and then say you won't chop when you have a good hand. We've already had it where he says, no, I don't chop. I had 2-3 offsuit. I just folded, gave him my $2, moving on. No biggie. So here I look down at pocket aces for the 5th time in the small blind. It's just folding it around to me, and it's just me and the big blind. So if it wasn't this guy, I'd be chopping aces for the 2nd time in this session, and I'd be super sad face. So I'm getting ready to play my hand, and he offers to chop. And I say, well, you told me you don't ever chop, and we didn't chop earlier. And he said, oh, well, yeah, but you said you wanted to chop, so we can chop if you want. And I was like, no, I have a good hand. You say you don't chop, so if you don't chop, let's play. So I raise to 20. He says I also have a good hand, and he calls my 20. The flop is ace of spades, king of spades, nine of clubs. That's pretty gorgeous of a flop. I flop top set. There obviously are gut shot straight draws are all that there could be here, and there's of course spade draws. Not that me and the guy to my left have had any kind of bad relationship, and like I said, I don't begrudge anyone for not wanting to chop, but I get the feeling that because I said no, we're not chopping and I raised, that continuation betting here is probably almost a weaker play than checking, because he's going to expect me to continuation bet, acting like I'm a big strong guy since I raised him pre-flop. So I do lead at my top set here for 25, and he calls. The turn is gorgeous. It's a 2 of hearts. I continue to bet. I bet 85, and he calls. The river's the queen of diamonds. That one's not my favorite, but it's pretty good. I don't expect him to have called a flop and a turn bet with 10 jack, just hoping to get there against me. So if he did do that, he's going to get a lot of my money. I decide to bet 225 at it. And he folds pretty quick. So I think he probably had some sort of spade draw. If he had an ace or maybe even a king, I think he would at least think about calling my river bet. Literally the very next hand, I'm on the button, and I don't get pocket aces, but I do get red pocket queens. We're playing 6-handed at this time. The +1 player limps. I raise to 25, and he calls. The flop is queen of clubs, 4 of diamonds, 9 of hearts, so I flop back-to-back top sets. That's pretty nice. Always good to run good. And that board is super dry, so he checks to me, and here I decide to check back. I just don't see how he can have much of this board, and if he randomly flopped a set of 4s or a set of 9s, I'm going to find out later anyway. I'm not really worried about a straight draw here. If he has 10 jack, he's open-ended, but I'm willing to risk it here. So I check back. The turn is the 2 of hearts, which is another pretty big brick. It does bring in a backdoor heart draw, but he checks to me again, and here I just don't think I have any choice. I think I have to bet. So I bet 30, and he ends up folding. After that last hand, I play for about another hour. I win another 125 or so, but none of the hands are super interesting, so I'm not including them. I'm in for 700, out for 1,202 for a win of 502 this session. What's going on, everyone? Back at Bellagio for another session after the World Series. This is just a super quick outro to give you my running total between the last vlog and this vlog. So, not recording tonight, but should be recording another one soon. Hopefully we'll get the 8th video out before too long. But you can see the running total there. The World Series is over. We'll see. Hopefully games are still okay, but probably not going to be quite as good. So anyways, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Don't make Luna sad, and hopefully we'll see you next time.